today I'm actually really excited. I have Luke Maslin in the studio, on the online studio. Luke, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brett. It's great to be here, virtually albeit, but it's nice to connect.
So if you've been following this podcast, Luke Maslin's name has come up a few times. We had Matthew Hart on the podcast, and he mentioned the work he'd been doing with Luke around his health and mentality and performance. And if you came to the launch tour in Sydney, your name came up again, Luke, from a number of sources. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to go straight to the source. Let's get you on the podcast and let's talk about what you're doing. And so for anyone here who has no idea what I'm talking about, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview right now. So your LinkedIn bio says it best. And let's just start with that. You're a former semi-pro athlete with more than a decade working in the corporate world in marketing and recruitment. So you started as a recruiter, which is great. I saw the same pattern everywhere. Ambitious men grinding hard, building careers, yet running on stress, stimulants, and willpower. That sounds very familiar to a lot of people. I was no different for a time until my own series of health challenges forced me to change. Let's unpack this. That's a great opening statement.
Well, there we go.
What was happening? Where do we start? Semi-pro. What were you playing? What sport?
Yeah, so I suppose to encapsulate the journey, I sort of talk about my life journey in three parts. So achievement, anxiety, alignment, and the bit around the health challenges. So very short story, grew up playing a lot of sport at a high level as a kid, sort of elite national level in multiple sports through my teenage years. Had my heart set on becoming an AFL footballer like a lot of young men that grow up in Melbourne do. I was on that pathway, on that track, thought it was going to happen. Didn't happen for a variety of reasons. And from that point in time, really spiraled into a pretty dark period of anxiety, OCD, mental health challenges. Still was very high functioning, went to uni, got an amazing degree, went into the corporate world, went into marketing. But this undercurrent of anxiety really ruled probably my late teens through to mid to late 20s. And that was the catalyst for starting to dive into understanding myself, understanding health more, and eventually coming through that period and coming into a period of alignment in the last sort of 5 to 10 years where, having come off the back of being in marketing recruitment, retrained, restudied certifications and education and a bunch of different things across health, and then have obviously built the business in the last sort of 5 to 10 years. So that's a very quick snapshot, but it really was that catalyst of the disappointment of basically a lifetime dream being crushed that precipitated a series of health challenges mentally. Had a lot of injuries, chronic injury, had a bunch of different health challenges going on. So that was where it all started.
Very fascinating. And so today what we're going to cover is kind of three main things, just so people listening at home know where this is headed. But the first one's going to be the power of functional medicine. You know, the blood work analysis work you do. We've kind of talked about that on other episodes. I want to go into that. Proactive versus reactive health. Interesting. I don't know what that is. And then health span versus lifespan. The second thing we want to jump on today is the idea of a healthy high performer, versus an anxious overachiever. And then the third one is that missing piece of being a resilient recruiter, from being one and then obviously coaching them now. So let's just start with the top there, because I think this is an interesting one. The power of functional medicine, blood work analysis, proactive versus reactive health, and health span versus lifespan. Let's go. What is this all about?
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So I suppose the context around that is that in the last sort of 5 or so years, a lot of my work and training and education and study has been in that broadly functional medicine, functional health, and particularly in the last few years, diving deep into the field of blood work analysis. So that's using blood work, as the name suggests. The analogy I use is like understanding what's happening underneath the hood for someone. So looking into everything from metabolism to immune system, liver, gallbladder function, all the different systems of the body, and what that's telling us about someone's state and their capacity and actually how healthy they are. And that probably leads into the second piece around the proactive versus reactive health. The reality is that we exist in a system where the conventional medical system has a lot of amazing things about it. It's great for acute care, emergency. It's also not really designed to be a proactive health optimization model in terms of the resources, the way that it's set up. So the functional medicine, functional health piece, and what we do as a business, using that as a key part of it, essentially forms a bridge for people to move away from being reactive with their health into being proactive and actually understanding and being empowered around what's going on for your health. Because ultimately that's what our mission is, and my mission is as a person, a business, is to really empower people to take control of their own health. And that's the difference between those two things. So the functional blood work is a key tool within that proactive health approach that we've really lent into in the last, as I said, probably a few years in particular in terms of my training. Yeah.
And talking to you off camera the other day, a lot of people will hear what you're saying now and think, I've heard this before, or we've all heard these concepts, but no one actually makes. It's hard for men in particular to take steps towards doing that, and it's only when you get older, into your late 30s, 40s, that your body starts to revolt somewhat,
Sure.
or your testosterone, all that stuff starts to change, and that's when people start to feel, oh. And I think, why I'm interested in talking to you is I've seen that change with Matt. He speaks so highly of the what would you call it, the evolution that he's gone through with your assistance, and prior to his early 30s, it was just what most dudes would do: burn the candle at both ends. You go out and you have a business lunch and you drink, and you might have a few wines at night. You might be on the laptop till 10 o'clock at night because that's what you got to do. But he just burnt the hell out, and he needed to do. Sounds very similar to you. Needed to do something. Needed to really understand what was happening. And I've even said, look, there's traditional blood tests, right? And you go and do those, and your markers might all say, no, you're fine. You're actually fine. All your major things are in where they need to be. And most people listening to this have probably had a blood test, and they've probably gone, well, yeah, all mine were good. Cholesterol's good, vitamin D's good, all that stuff's good. I've got nothing to worry about. What do you say, or what do you typically see when someone comes in and they say, yeah, I've had the bloods, I'm good, I'm feeling a bit shit, and then they go and do your blood test? Obviously, that's going to tell a different story.
Yeah.
What do you typically see?
Yeah, it's a great point. And that's the proactive versus reactive piece. So for some context in terms of blood work, as you said, we've all probably had some level of blood testing done before at a GP. Normally it's when you're sick and unwell to begin with, and that's why they're doing it. So just for some context in terms of what that means, when they're looking at blood work and it's tested in that format, they're looking at the ranges on those from what's called a population average. So all the different blood markers that they might test, and you'll see the range and you get it back and they say everything's normal or everything's within range. Those ranges are based on a population average. So that's not telling us what's healthy for someone. That's just telling us a distribution curve average of what everyone in that population who's had that marker tested has come up with. And the normal range, like in any statistical model, is just two standard deviations outside of that to capture the normal range. So it doesn't tell us anything really about what's healthy. It's based on what's presenting in the population. And unfortunately, we know from the statistics that the population is increasingly unwell, unhealthy. We're fatter than ever, we're sicker than ever, there's more mental illness than ever. So it's not really telling us much about what's healthy. So that's the first piece around that, is just the way that it's set up, and the system doesn't really do that. Compared to in the functional medicine, functional health space, where the ranges that are used are actually based on research and data that's constantly evolving. So as opposed to what's the population saying within those, it's what's actually healthy based on driving someone towards health, not just minimizing disease. Because again, the conventional medical model is very much around disease management, right? You have this thing, you present with this thing, here's this solution for the symptom, as opposed to here are the ranges of markers, and we can see not only what's outside of the conventional range, but more importantly, what's outside of what's healthy. Because there's a very big difference between what's normal, which is here, and what's healthy, which is here. And most importantly, the two parts that sit between those where we can start to be proactive. What's high and what's low, and what do we want to help manage and mitigate and be proactive with, rather than wait until they get to the extremes and then have the disease, the illness, the breakdown, the burnout, whatever it might be.
And I know I haven't done any specific work with yourself, but I've had similar advice over the years. I remember going in and looking at my blood work, and the lady doing it looked at it and said, "Oh, your vitamin D's low." And I looked at it and I'm like, "Mate, it's way within range." She goes, "No, it's just low. Trust me, it's low. Let's just get you on some drops." I'm like, okay. So I now take drops. But I remember it was night and day how I felt a week later after just having a few vitamins to get that up. It was still within that normalized bell curve range. It was at the lower end. And most GPs would say, it's fine, it's normal. She wanted to get it right to the top end. Being a type 1 diabetic, you burn a lot more vitamin D. And yeah, I mean, just that alone, I felt so much better. What are some of your favourite transformations that you've seen over the years from the work that people have been doing with you?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I mean, well, obviously, Matt, who you've had on the podcast and know I was toured with you, is one of my all-time favourites for a variety of reasons. Obviously, contextually, it's very relevant in terms of the people probably listening to this in the recruitment space. Above and beyond that, it's just a really amazing transformation for the period of life he was going through, the work that we did together. And most importantly, it's probably one of the biggest things that I'm so passionate about is, yes, it's about health optimization. Yes, it's about performance. Those two things can translate to a lot of different aspects of life. That might mean building and starting a new business. In Matt's case, exactly what he did, left his old position, started a whole new business that's now up and thriving. It might mean starting a family. It might mean having children. It might mean a variety of different things. So, the actual health transformation and moving someone's blood markers and getting them healthier in terms of data and numbers, it's amazing. It's really great. And it's particularly good for men because we tend to be a little bit more attached to what we can touch, weigh, feel, measure, etc. And the transformations that I also love are, those type of things where someone from a better place of health and capacity, resilience, an underlying state of well-being, then can actually create something like it's a business. We work with, professional and semi-professional athletes that have, been to World Cups or been to World Championships or things like that. And we've also had at the other end, guys that are in leadership positions that are, go and start a business or have had trouble maybe conceiving a child. I've been fortunate enough to help a number of men go through that process. And so for me, that's what I'm so passionate about is how do we help someone take a better state of health tangibly and turn that into something they want to do, whether that's, performance in the field, performance at work, performance in terms of like being able to do the things, like I said, start a family or whatever it might be, so that there's a way they can actually operationalize health for health's sake. I think we can get, especially now with the world and what's going on and AI and all this, there's a lot of data and information and, biohacking and all that sort of stuff, which I'm part of to a degree. And I'm also really big on that at the center of that there's a human being, and you're not a set of numbers and you're not just a set of data points, you're also a human. And that's really important for me around the human transformation as much as it is, data and numbers and that sort of thing as well.
The second thing we want to talk about today, which we're kind of venturing into at the moment, is that difference between a healthy high performer versus an anxious overachiever, because they will present very similarly, right? Like you would see someone who's kicking goals and, one's going to be just a high performer. They're very measured. All their metrics are in place, and it's a good balance, right? But they're performing. And then the others, you can see, are just driven by anxiety and fear, I guess, and all these other things. But can we explore this a little bit? Like, tell me what you mean by these two sort of types of individuals.
Yeah, it's in the context of recruitment, it's really interesting. Obviously, having worked in recruitment for 7-8 years across London and then Sydney, Buckley Walters, it's something that I'd probably clocked in that space really clearly, like the difference or the balance between someone who could perform at a high level and also be able to sustain that in a way where they were healthy at the same time to a degree, and the ones that weren't able to do that. And like, if I'm being brutally honest, like I didn't see a whole lot of great examples of very many people that struck that balance well, despite like I've got a lot of amazing performers, got a lot of great mentors, and they're great people. And I think the challenge is always in a performance-driven environment like recruitment is. I mean, I've been in performance-driven environments my whole life, whether it's sport, recruitment, etc. That's what you're getting judged on, and that's fair enough. And also what we need to understand that in any context, if you're driving purely for performance, there's a trade-off somewhere else, right? So health being potentially one of those. So the analogy that I often use with clients is we imagine like a pyramid. So if you imagine that being the base of a pyramid, and that's health, and on either side you've got aesthetics, which whether people admit it or not, that's what people want. They want to look good, they want to feel good in their body, they want to actually have confidence in themselves, and they want to perform on the other side. And that might be making more money at work, billing more, building a business. It might be performing in the gym, whatever that is. And most of the time, people are obsessed or hyper focused on the aesthetics and the performance, and not actually understanding that the width and stability of this basis of health is actually what drives how big that triangle can be. Like, that's basic geometry, right? If this is smaller, that can't be very big.
Yeah.
If that's bigger and bigger and
I like
wider
it.
and gets bigger, this whole surface area gets larger. So why I say that is the healthy high performer concept is I'm all about performance. Like, I love it. I want people to be able to perform at a super high level. And the basis of that is health. So physical health, metabolic health, mental health, emotional health, hormonal health. The stronger that is, the more we can drive those other two things over time. And where people fall into issues is when the performance and or the aesthetics becomes too hyper focused for too long. And I've been there before. Like, I was, as I said, as an athlete, for large chunks of that, actually wasn't very healthy. Like, metabolically, hormonally, not that healthy. If you looked at me and you could see some photos, you'd go, whoa, like, this guy's incredible. And that, to be honest, a lot of athletes are like that because there's a trade-off. Like, but the difference is that's their job. They're actually getting
Yes.
remunerated purely for that, right? Now, although recruiters are getting remunerated for what they do, they're not getting, that's not their only responsibility in life, right? It's like you then have to be other things as well. So that's the healthy high performer, is how do we get people to understand that health isn't like a fluffy, like soft concept. It's actually a performance driver. The healthier someone is, the higher they're going to perform at a consistent level over a period of time. And that's the big thing that that's my big buy-in from clients is like, if we get you as robustly, and again, circling back to Maddie, great example of that. And I could give you another 10 of guys like that, where it's like, you're already a high performer, you're already crushing it in things, but your health, that foundation, it's either collapsed or it's on the verge of collapsing. And if that happens, it's a long way to build it back. So that's the healthy high performer piece. And then the anxious overachiever or the insecure overachiever. Like, to be perfectly honest, that's been my archetype for a long time. And I don't say that term in a negative way either, because this sense of insecurity and drive for achievement and a little bit of that overachiever type, again, a lot of recruiters are going to fall into that archetype, right? It's a performance culture, living on the edge of that, little bit of anxiety driving you to do stuff. That, again, the balance and where we'd like to help people get to is using achievement as a way to drive you forward, but not as pure validation, and learning to translate that sense of anxiety into, like I was saying before, like alignment and energy and focus, rather than being from a place of fear. Because if you're operating out of fear the whole time, not only is it not great for your performance long term, but it's very detrimental to your health.
The cortisol racing through the veins.
Yeah, cortisol, we get immune system dysregulation. It's going to lead to disease and dysfunction. And, it might not show up now. It might not show up next year. It might not show up in 3 years' time, but it might be when you're 35, when you're 40, when you're 45, when you're 50, that it's accumulated over that period of time from just running in survival mode, which is, again, I haven't been in recruitment for a long time. Well, not a long time, 5-6 years now. But my experience of being in there is that a lot of people are just living in that mode, and it's got a shelf life. Yeah, it's got a shelf life.
So on that, what is the typical age of people who come to you, and when is there too soon to come and see you, and do this work? Like, if you're a 20-year-old who's just kicked off recruiting and they're going, oh, it's a little bit stressful, or maybe they feel fine and they're just going, well, I'm fine because they've got, they're a spring chicken and they've got, the body of an Adonis. It's working perfectly fine. Would that be too soon for them to come and see you? Or do you think the earlier the better?
That's a really great question. I mean, 100% the earlier the better. If I could have a time machine and go back in time and go back to when I was 20, even 25, and start to get a baseline understanding for where my system was at that time, and use that as a reference point as I went through my 20s and 30s, and now I just turned 40, last year, that would be invaluable. Like, if I had a time machine, 100% I would go back and do that, as a, young recruiter or young person in the corporate space, starting out and building their career and things like that. So that's the ideal. The reality is, like you said, that most people when they're 25, particularly, again, without stereotyping, young men that are of that type A, high achieving type, think they're bulletproof. I did. Like, I thought I was bulletproof. So sometimes the pain isn't strong enough for someone to feel the need to take that action. And it's going to take someone that's very proactive to do that. In saying that, I actually think that the generation coming, like the sort of generation of us now, I mean, the stats will tell us they are more aware of health. They're drinking less. They're doing more, they're doing more things that are probably aligned to that a bit more. So perhaps there's an opportunity for that generation coming through to be more proactive. So the short answer is yes. The earlier you get onto this stuff, the better. And even if we go through 20s and 30s, like if you start to get an understanding for what's happening and manage yourself in your 30s, it's infinitely easier than your 40s. And because I've worked with men, right through from 20s to into their 50s, I've had a really great snapshot of how much harder and challenging it is for someone to do this work when you're in your 40s and particularly 50s versus if you're in your 30s, because it's just accumulated patterns of being and behavior and ways of doing things, and also accumulated metabolic, hormonal, systemic damage as well. So the earlier the better would be great. And I also recognize that at the end of the day, most people only really take action when there's enough pain to take action a lot of the time.
I'm gonna end on this because I feel like the third thing that we were going to cover today, that missing piece of being a resilient recruiter, I actually think you covered that in the last bit with the triangle and everything like that. And I think it all makes sense, right? When you're working optimally, you've got more ability to bounce back and handle the stress and the load that comes in. Because I want to ask you a question. I don't know if you can answer it, but
I'll try.
Are there tangible results? And I'm not talking about health markers. I'm talking about recruiters that you've worked with who've gone through your program. They started billing here and now they're billing here. Have you got actual real data around outcomes from a bank account perspective? I know that sounds really crude and whatever, but that will resonate with some people. That'll be things that people who are on the fence go, well, fuck it, if this is going to help me, then maybe we should have a look at this.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of people dismiss their health, as you would know.
Yeah. I mean, to be transparent, direct recruiters, I haven't worked with that many. I've worked with a couple of leaders like Maddie. So, I mean, again, with that kind of numbers around Maddie, I mean, you can see that's an example of, I mean, he was already a high biller in his business, but we're talking about a guy that's, left that environment, gone and started his own shop, and now has, I think he has like maybe 6 or 8 staff, and he's 8 staff, and he's crushing. And you could look at the numbers, is what he's doing there. So that's probably the example that I'd give around, and that's probably more so interesting around someone who's already amazing and has gone to that other level. What I have done elsewhere, not specifically recruiting, but we also work with a lot of people most of our clients are in some sort of sales-driven environment. So we work with like people running real estate agencies, tech sales people, things like that. So, there's a couple of great examples of, I've got a client of mine in New Zealand who's a GM of a big real estate agency over there, where that agency and his business and, in terms of their market is exponentially increased. We've got some guys that are running, being involved in running sales teams. I don't know the numbers and the inside out of it because I'm not privy to that. But, worked with a client recently who their business that he works for has gone through a massive period of growth, and then it's been sold to one of the big tech companies for God knows how much money. So, yeah, for me, it's about supporting someone in the goals and whatever the tangible outcomes are, for sure. And I think for me, just to touch on the resilient recruiter piece, because you did mention it there, I think one of the biggest things that I just drop in today before we round up about that is that, having been recruiting for a long time as well, I think people have a bit of a misunderstanding for what resilience is all about, and almost a perception that it's like a capacity for suffering, like how much can I suffer is a level of resilience, and also a sense that resilience means purely like Jedi mind tricks, or how do I manage my mind, or like it's all a head-based piece. And what the biggest thing I'd like to get across to anyone listening today is that resilience, health, all of this sort of stuff, it's a top-down and bottom-up process. And what I mean by that is that if you want to build resilience, and resilience is a core part of being healthy, it's about what you do top-down from your mind to your body, but it's also about what happens bottom-up, so how your physiology impacts your psychology as well. And resilience is a really good example of where people miss that, because yes, top-down coaching and journaling and meditation and all those things, I use those tools. But if the bottom up's not being taken care of, like your nutrition, like your sleep, like your hydration, like how you manage yourself physically, you can't solve the problem of the mind just through the mind. So that's probably one thing that I just say around that as well.
Oh, 100% agree. And if anyone saw me at launch, I started the whole day with that. If you don't get the basics right, if your battery's not charged, then how on earth are you meant to power the day, you know? So I love it, Luke. I'm so glad we got you on. I'm going to wrap it up at that. Thank you so much for coming on. If you want to reach out to Luke, go and do so. We'll drop links below. You'll see it'll be very easy to access him, but I'm endorsing him for no other reason. He's not sponsoring this. I just love bringing the audience great stuff that's maybe a little bit outside of the box. And from everything I'm hearing, Luke, you're doing an amazing job and helping a lot of people. And, mate, it's awesome. Awesome to see you kicking goals. So thank you for jumping on. Guys, like, share, subscribe. Helps us grow. As always, have an amazing day. And, mate, all your deals come through. Luke, again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Brett. It's been great to chat. And, love to come back anytime.